rising stars in their companies and accomplished software engineers. They are also Academy industry mentors, which means that they are very invested in writing that tech talent pyramid that Ash showed you all earlier. They actually give back their time to mentor some of our scholars when they go into the workplace. And in doing so, they enjoy some benefits for the fruits of their labor as well, because they get to learn all of the management skills that we teach at Academy to help people nurture and integrate junior talent. So I think what we might do is do a quick round of intros. And because some of you have come into tech the non-traditional way, which is something we've tried to figure out how to do today, maybe you could tell us a bit about how you got into tech as well. So Ed, over to you.
So I'm Ed, and I work at JustPark as a back-end engineer. Bit of a quick intro about how I got into tech. So I started off in the customer support team, working with drivers that had issues with car parking, so JustPark, parking services company. And then was just working through a boot camp in my spare time. And then just staying driven, essentially, to then move forward and then get a role in JustPark. So they had an internal vacancy. I applied and managed to get the role. So that's how I made my way into tech.
Oh, you make it sound so easy. Zak.
Yeah, I'm Zak. I currently work as a full-stack engineer at Bulb Energy, so that's an interesting time. I had like semi-traditional route in, so I did an unrelated undergraduate degree, worked in marketing for a year, and then did a conversion master's to computer science, and then out the back of that spent 3.5 years at Amazon Video, and then moved to Bulb a year ago.
Hello, I'm Troy. I'm a front end for a company called Infogrid. The way I got into tech was I self-taught, so lots of online courses, little boot camps, and then I managed to join a boot camp from Google, essentially, on a platform called Udemy. Before I finished that, I managed to land a junior role in a healthcare company. And then, yeah, it's been from there.
Hi, I'm Danni. I am a back-end software engineer at a startup called Privitar, which is a data privacy startup. I took a non-traditional route into the tech industry. I was a maths grad at Loughborough Uni, and was very lucky that there was another startup called Moogsoft that were just looking for, I guess, like any graduates, specifically in maths. They were willing to take a gamble on somebody who didn't know how to code, and I was lucky to land the role. I learnt to code on the job. I did like a week's boot camp, and yeah, the rest is history. I guess I've done 4.5 years now in the industry and seem to be doing all right.
So the lesson is all of us can become engineers. It's that easy. So quick straw poll. I know we're all trying to hire engineers in this room probably, but raise your hand if your company requires a computer science degree for your engineering hires. Okay, raise your hand if your company requires a certain level of experience for your engineering hires. How many years of experience?
3. Around 3.
3?
Yeah, 3 to 5.
3 to 5. Okay. So let's kind of take a step back from that for a second, because some of these folks, as you just heard, have different pathways into tech. They're all successfully in tech now. So question would be, if you had to take someone off the street and determine whether they have the traits, the capacity to become a technologist, what are the kinds of qualities that you'd look for? Because you can't look at their resume, you can't look at their degree, you don't know where they've been educated. What would you actually look for? Like maybe Ed, we can start with you.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about my experience, I think the biggest thing's been about drive, actually genuinely wanting to do it. Because you can have as many years of experience as you have, whatever, then suddenly you just lose passion and then you kind of don't really, push yourself forward to then keep developing and growing. I think someone coming into it fresh, just having that drive and real passion to really get on and, to hit the road and get going really with it. I think that's really the big thing I'd look for.
Mm-hmm. Zak?
Yeah, I think somewhat related, I'd look for kind of problem-solving interest. I think, it's something that will drive the drive for a lot of people. Because I've seen like people that went through my course, like a conversion course, trying to take a sort of legitimate way in, but they saw it as like a means to an end, and they didn't really enjoy the process of like the software solving problems day to day, and that just sort of didn't carry them through in the same way. And then the other thing I'd look for is just general sort of people skills. So I think that's like underrepresented, undervalued, and it's something that like a lot of the academy mentors or mentees, we see like that's a real comparative advantage, and you can be great at computer science, but it's not nearly as predictive as like being good at general software engineering and working in a company.
Okay, so you can't just code alone in a basement anymore, is what you're saying? Yeah.
Not for most jobs.
Not for most jobs, yeah, okay. And I mean, I'm picking up on what you're both saying here too, is like having the drive and the curiosity to really problem solve is important. I had someone in the mentorship program described engineering to me the other day as being like, you solve a problem, then you solve the next problem, then you solve the problem after that, right? So if you're not actually passionate about that, you're not gonna get very far. Troy, what would you add?
Yeah, I was going to say drive is super important. Obviously, you come across a lot of problems and you need to carry on going. It's very easy to want to stop, so I think that's one of the most important things. And also curiosity. So being curious about what you're doing, I think that leads to the drive. And yeah, passion as well for tech.
Yeah, I think the thing about the industry is it's like ever evolving. So you need somebody who's going to be open to constantly learning. And I think that's the thing that I find consistent, irrespective of what degree discipline that you did. So I enjoyed maths because there's a solution at the end of it, and that's kind of lends itself quite well to computer science and to the tech industry and to my role as an engineer. I like to get to the answer, and the other thing with that is you need to be open-minded and confident to suggest your answers, but also quite humble in understanding other people's points of views and coming together for a collaborative approach or result. And I think that's one thing that I would look for, because I think it's, as Zak was mentioning earlier, like it's really important to have teamwork skills and to be able to collaborate. And I think that's one thing that's, yeah, as you said, like undersold a bit.
Okay, brilliant. So a great blueprint there for traits of an engineer, regardless of your background. Let's see if we can tackle a myth that may or may not have come up in the room slightly earlier. So we looked at Ash's talent pyramid. We saw that all of the demand is pretty much for mid to senior level positions. Assuming a team was all senior people, would that be a good thing or a bad thing? Question.
I'd say that's a bad thing because too many cooks spoil the broth. It is a big tendency from seniors that I've met, not where I work, but just in general, to want to try and solve everything themselves. Just because they've come from environments where that's been necessary. And that isn't really the best predictor of success. It's teamwork and collaboration, like we've spoken about just now, like the communication piece is really important. So I think that having varied viewpoints and even disciplines in a team is really important. So I think that a team of all mids and seniors would not solve problems as well as a team of mixed abilities as well as mixed discipline, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think similarly, like too many seniors is going to be a problem. I think the way I view it is senior ends up being kind of a different job role at most companies. A lot of companies use senior to mean, you know, architect or similar roles that sort of branch out a bit, or they end up taking on some management responsibilities. And with that being the norm for most places, you don't have a team of 8 managers all like with no reports. And I think that's what a team of all seniors would look like. You want like a good spread of people who are just going to like get things done. It's also going to depend on like the project they're tackling. Does it need like complex design work, or is it well spec'd out and just, you know, needs 5 people to hit the ground and run? And I think there you're going to be fine with like a part-time senior and then a mix of juniors and like mid-level.
Yeah, I guess I also think that being senior, you can kind of get stuck in your own ways. And a lot of times if a team's fully senior, they can probably get stuck in doing something a certain way, which may not be the best way. And someone fresh, someone learning all the new content could come in and change your working practice, which could really improve the team.
I think, like similar to what Troy said, I think when you have a team of senior or mid-level engineers, you get the risk of having like siloed knowledge, where people are so used to what they know, or are used to kind of relying on other teammates because they know this, you know, specific concept quite well. And when you're picking up tickets or working on a problem, you kind of end up just shifting the work to who's going to be able to get the tickets done or get the feature out the door the quickest. And I think when you have juniors come in, a junior's not necessarily going to know a great deal, so we'll need a lot of coaching and a lot of explanation, which really kind of moves the knowledge around the team. And whether you're just explaining to a single junior or you're discussing as a team, having to explain to somebody else means that knowledge becomes shared rather than just being isolated to the single senior who's worked on that problem countless times.
Okay, Danny, you're anticipating my next question here because I think this came up earlier. Like Margaret, wherever you are, you were saying that, that some teams just aren't ready. Like, for example, at your company, you were thinking about that. I think some other folks were mentioning, you were talking about how, well, it's actually quite costly investment to bring on a junior. Will they stay? Is it worth it? It's a zero-sum game. Like, maybe we can linger on this point a little bit because all of you have worked a lot with juniors. You've been juniors yourself to some extent. So do juniors actually benefit a team? And if so, how? How do they make a team better?
I think that people that are new in the industry have a different perspective. And there's a lot of, I wouldn't necessarily say depth, but there's a lot of understanding that's gone into software engineering that may or may not be right. And I think that someone with a fresh perspective could really help challenge that. And there is an investment that comes up front with a junior, that's true, but worrying whether they're going to leave when you invest in them isn't the right approach, because regardless, you're going to have them as an employee, and are they going to be a benefit to you during that time? And I think that training them and developing them as much as you can, and then in essence investing in them, means that they're going to be more likely to want to stay. And I think that investment piece is really important for knowledge and just building the field as a whole.
Yeah, that's a great point, Ed. What's that kind of age-old cliche, which is like, what if we invest in them and they leave? It's like, well, what if we don't and they stay? It's that kind of thing. Yeah, Zach.
I think it's important to look at the effect it has on like the rest of your team. It's easy to just focus on, they've taken this time away from this team member and their productivity is here, and you get that zero-sum game kind of feeling. But like, we're sat here because part of what we want out of our careers is to help people. We find that fulfilling, and providing that mentorship opportunity is going to lead to more motivated, more fulfilled mid-level and senior engineers on the team. It's a lot harder to track that kind of productivity change, and it's going to, I think, it's going to show in retention and that sort of thing. There's a big angle of what people find fulfilling and self-determination theory kind of stuff about what is good in a job, and one of those is feeling like you're good at it, feeling mastery, and being able to teach someone else what you've learned is a great way to get your imposter syndrome in check and realize that you were there before, and as well just that you are good enough to pass something on. And I think that's an underrated benefit.
For sure.
Yeah, definitely echo Zach's point there. I think there's so many benefits, obviously. The passion, normally a junior comes on, they're super passionate, super energized, and I think that can rub off on other team members. I've certainly experienced that myself, where you kind of been working for a few years and someone comes in super fresh, super willing to learn, and it really motivates you to try and push yourself. So I think that's also another benefit which doesn't really get thought about a lot.
I guess just to echo a lot of the points, so I think one of the best things about juniors is they're constantly asking why. Why does this work? Why does that happen? Why are you taking this approach? And it makes you a bit more self-reflective. So not only do you have to then work out how to explain something to somebody else, it consolidates your knowledge of that and also makes you reflect on your own practices and are they the best practices? Maybe we can collaborate on working out a more streamlined process or things like that. And I think it really makes you quite self-reflective, having juniors who are constantly asking why. And that's the thing that I think we should encourage the most, is the collaborative aspect of software engineering, and making sure that people feel comfortable to ask the whys, because that's where you get the best innovation and that's where you get the best outcome from all members of your team.
Okay, excellent. So no resting on your laurels if you've got a junior in your team. It sounds like they're really going to push you. What would you say to folks in this audience who are thinking about, well, maybe we want to make the case for bringing earlier career diverse talent into our organizations? What can they expect in the first 6 months to a year from folks? Let's assume they're very high potential people, like the folks you've been talking about earlier.
That's a big question. I have to really think about that for a sec. You can expect somebody that will really want it. So I think there's a lot of people that want tech or want to get a role in tech for the money. And that's no secret, the money is good. But then what happens after that? They kind of peter out because they lose passion or they haven't got a why after that. They kind of get the role and then, right, now I'm here, now what do I do? Oh, well, I don't know. Somebody that's early starting hasn't found that yet. They're just trying to get their foot in the door, so they're really willing to put in that extra effort and actually drive themselves forward to progress and grow. So I think you could really expect a very long-standing member of your team if you have somebody join in that way.
So it sounds like it's actually good for retention because that, you know, if you're just in it for the money, that's quite mercenary. I mean, you have no idea why someone's going to stay at your company. Zach?
Caught out. Yeah, I think part of the thing is like managing upwards to like get the right expectations in place. Like, you know, it's going to be, as we've discussed, kind of a measurable investment. You are going to like expend some productivity in the short term from the team, but like making whoever's like making that call understand that, you know, you're not trying to do like a short term, we want another head on this team to get this project done a month sooner. Like, that maths doesn't work out. Give them a copy of the Mythical Man Month and you know, hopefully they'll read it. But yeah, like, manage the expectations, make sure they know that this is a longer term investment, and like if they put the investment in, then it should pay off, rather than this self-fulfilling prophecy of get someone in because you think they're cheap and then they cost you, they get nothing out of it, and 6 months later they've got a better deal where they've got more mentorship out of a different job.
Yeah, I think most juniors I've worked with have been super adaptable and learnt super quick. Obviously there's a thing of when you hire a junior, you're like, oh, I don't really know what they're going to be like. But I think most of the time, if they're driven, they're normally, yeah, super quick to learn. And you also get a unique opportunity, I think, to shape them, which most suit your company. So you can provide them with training, and they probably won't have much of a base before that, and you can really shape them to be someone who will provide a lot of value for you.
Yeah, I think you need to approach like hiring juniors with an open mind. Like, juniors are going to come in with a lot of energy and a lot of drive to learn, but as long as you're providing that space where you're encouraging that and providing a healthy forum for discussion and making sure that juniors are able to have the space to learn. I think the thing with the industry is there is a lot of imposter syndrome, and if juniors feel confident in being able to have a buddy or their line manager or somebody that they can go to for asking those questions, and making sure that those people who are mentoring them or are you know, being their guiding star or whatever through the first few months of their journey, having that reliability that they're not going to kind of get turned away and have their questions not answered, I think is really important. But I think the thing that you will get with juniors is that they will really want to solve their own problems. Like, people don't ask questions anywhere near as quick enough, so you get the balance. You get people who are going to ask questions and always ask the whys, but they're also going to be super, super driven and determined to like get to the results themselves, because that's part of the joy of the job, is like you get a little win when you get the answer yourself. So it's finding that balance, and I think that's what you'd expect from a junior, is you'd have both sides of the spectrum in a single person, which is a great measure for success as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, Danny, about how you can actually create space for that. So last question, then we'll open this up to the room, because I'm sure you have questions and thoughts for these folks. But how do you actually build the environment where juniors and, let's say, just people who are coming into tech from a diverse background can thrive? Like, what are some of the things that companies should be thinking about?
I want to think about my answer, so I'm going to pass the mic on.
Yeah, go for it.
I'm not really sure what I'd recommend quite yet, but let me have a think.
Yeah. I mean, I can rephrase the question too, which is like, what makes for a good team for folks who are coming in? Maybe they're a bit diverse, maybe they've come from a different background, maybe they're just completely new to tech entirely. Anything.
I think the things that come to mind for me are making sure you can sort of take the guesswork out of it for them. So like Danny said, like there's going to be some people that don't feel comfortable asking and wait far too long, and like I see that in myself very much so. And I think putting systems in place, like it doesn't matter what the team is, like it's easy to say be welcoming. How do you formalize that? But what you can say is something like get them one person that is always there ready to answer their questions so they know who to go to. Get them like there's a thing called the 20-minute rule that I recommend a lot. Like if you've not worked on it for 20 minutes, keep trying yourself. If you have worked on it for 20 minutes, you're permitted to like feel fully entitled to go ask for help. And like take that sort of self-doubt the moment that they have to make all these calls and lines in the sand. Like do what you can to take that away, and I think that's good support.
That's a great rule to live by.
I have an answer now. I think that it is making space and making sure that there is resource to actually help that person. So like Zak was saying with the 20-minute rule, like that's really important to have somebody that is able to answer that question. Because there's juniors that will join a company in a smaller environment that won't have somebody to ask. And that's really important. I think another point as well that's really, really relevant is to understand what they can actually do and what value they can add outside of the technical role. Because people can look at work that's due to be done, look at a feature, and actually give valid critique on it. And that's valuable. We should make sure that those people that are in that position know their voices are heard. I think that's a really important point.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's quite a good reflection to have a new junior join, because you can kind of review your processes. I don't think any company will have perfect processes. And I think going back to both your points, assigning a buddy to the junior and checking in often, getting feedback, seeing what's working, what's not working, I think can massively improve a company. And then throughout that, you can get a better onboarding flow, and it becomes a lot easier to hire juniors.
Yeah, I guess reflecting on my personal experience when I first came into the industry as a junior, I didn't have necessarily the best buddy system in place. Like I felt very nervous to ask questions, and as Zak was saying, spent way too long trying to work things out myself when I could have really asked somebody. And the thing is, you don't know what you don't know as a junior, so it's good to have that safe space to be able to ask those questions. But yeah, similar to what Troy was saying about processes, is I think one of the key things is making sure that you can have good processes to break down work into much smaller sections, and that's something that no matter what level of seniority you are, is always really important to go back to basics and really try to break down the work and the tasks that you're allocated. I think when you become more and more confident in the industry, you kind of just pick up work and you don't really think about breaking it down. And when you do, you can start to parallelize it, and it actually creates a higher velocity within your team, which is really important. And I think when you have a junior who doesn't necessarily know how to break down bigger tasks, it forces the rest of the team to do that and creates better velocity within the team just in general.
That's such a good point, Danny. And I mean, it sounds like, just as a reflection on all of the points you just made, which are so good, a lot of these things would be good things for a team to do, regardless of whether or not they have junior talent coming in. So any thoughts, questions from the crowd? Yeah, please.
Very curious to see, you all have been working for a while, so work with not only senior people, but also juniors that coming from a traditional or a non-traditional background. What difference do you see between specifically just the juniors coming from a more uni background and someone coming from an alternative thing?
Great question.
With comp sci and tech grads, from my experience, there's been a lot more of the low-level granular understanding of what goes on in a computer, which is useful. But then the same skill differences with the normal workflow is still missing. So there would be a lot of understanding of how something would work, but not necessarily understanding what the process is to actually get it to work correctly and building it in the right way. I think another difference as well would be the understanding of the industry as well, and just the feeling of imposter syndrome. Somebody that's not from a technical background will come in and feel like there's a chip on their shoulder, whereas somebody that's done the more traditional route knows that this is part of the territory, really, this is what I should be doing. So I think there's a difference in somewhat in personality, I think, between those two. I can't really put my finger on what it is, but I think there would be a difference there.
Sounds like a bit of a psychological difference too, just in terms of like the imposter syndrome we talked about,
so,
right?
yeah.
Zach?
Yeah, I'd largely like agree with what Ed said. One thing that I'd add is like, again, it's like not hugely relevant. I think like you learn a lot of software engineering on the job, and the people who've gone through a traditional route have learned computer science. And I think most of us don't appreciate how big the difference is until we're doing the job. But one thing to be careful of, especially when you're trying to make a welcoming environment for new juniors, is people who've all done computer science sort of share a common language and can use the metaphors from that to explain the software engineering things. And I think that's something that I've tried to be more cognizant of. If someone's coming from a less traditional background, they're still kind of learning from scratch in terms of practically what they need to do day to day, but the ways that you might need to explain things to them or that'll like be useful analogies could change.
Decoding all the jargon, hey?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think from my experience, I've seen a lot of people coming from the non-traditional side being more motivated and more driven. I guess I'd chalk that down to they had to find the motivation to learn themselves. So they must be super passionate if they've landed themselves a job. Whereas I guess computer science degree, they've kind of gone for it, and maybe the people I've worked with, it sort of hasn't been their passion. But at least that's what I've seen.
Yeah, I guess I don't really have a great deal to add, but I just want to echo what you said, Zach. Myself coming from a non-traditional route, even now 4.5 years later, like there's so much jargon that I may or may not have learned at like doing a computer science degree. And even now, like I think just having that awareness of not necessarily using overly loaded jargon to explain concepts, and I think that's something that you also end up getting out of those individuals further down the line, is that they're aware of that. So I think that one of my personal skills within a team is to be able to explain things so that everybody on the team understands. And I think I've really developed that skill and become better at it because I didn't go through that traditional route and because I don't know all of these terms. And it also makes you a much better developer when it comes to working in a more collaborative team with UX and with your product designers. It puts you all on the same page, and having those skills really benefits a team. I might not be the best software developer in my team, but I bring other skills to the table that I've developed through taking a non-traditional route in, and I'm still learning and I'm still developing some of those skills and still catching up. But there's other things that you bring to the table which really benefit a team, I think.
It's interesting because one of the things I hear you all saying is that you just can't opt out of learning no matter how much experience you have, which is maybe something that makes tech really unique. And the average shelf life of a hard skill is like less than 2 years. So the jargon might change, so you gotta learn new jargon. Maybe time for one more question. Yes?
I'm not sure if you guys are contractors or permanent at your companies, but is there still the desire, you think, for you guys to go contracting and chase the pot of gold?
Well, I do like freelance work in my spare time anyway.
Classic Ed. So driven.
I have, as I'm sure the others have as well, loads of LinkedIn messages asking for contract and asking if I'm interested. I'm not. I've said to myself that I'd rather work for a company permanently that has a vision and actually build something long term. I don't really want to parachute in and try and fix a mess. I'd rather build something that I'm proud of and continually build it every day.
Yeah, I think somewhat similar. I see contracting as fitting a specific kind of model of what you want from the job, and that tends to be people that are more frustrated with like the people side, the product side. They just want to like be given tickets, write code. And I think similar to what Ed said, like I think part of my comparative advantage is that I do have a decent like product mindset, and I'm going to be more valuable to a team if I can like have input on that and shape that over the course of several years, rather than I think contractors are actively going away from that. We've heard in our contractor interviews that they found it weird that we've asked questions that try to measure that, and they're like, look, I can answer this, but I think you're looking at it wrong.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the money, it is appetizing or appealing. But But I think a lot of my enjoyment in my job is being sort of planted into a product team and solving the problems around that, more than just engineering, kind of figuring out from designs all the way up to sort of tracking user analytics. And I think, at least my perception of contracting is more, as you said, you're planted in, smashing out tickets all day long, going home, and that's it. Yeah, I think it definitely suits the right people, and further down the line, maybe that'll be exactly what I'm looking for, but I think at the moment, not really.
Yeah, I guess I kind of echo a lot of what the guys say. I haven't really thought about it myself, like as a potential path in my career, but certainly from my own experience of contractors coming into the teams as and when they've been needed, I think it really depends on the type of work that they're doing. If it's more platform based and you need expertise in a certain area, then I think it's of benefit. But I think when you're talking about the long-term goals of a product, and certainly I've worked in startups, so it's very product heavy, it's very focused on our users, I'm not sure that there's much benefit. And for me as an engineer, I'm less into the really hardcore techie side of things and much more into the product, the drive, the users, the use cases. And for me, I just think I'd struggle to get that in a contracting role. So.
Okay, I hope you're all writing this down because this is very good insight. Did you have a question, or were you saying we're done?
I can just suggest, because I think there's a few questions. So if we can just ask one question to one panelist rather than all four panelists, and then we can get to a couple of questions.
Okay, I'm going to cheat and go to Ash because I'm very biased.
Yeah, I was curious, it was when you were all describing your route into tech. I can't direct it to one individual, but whoever is the most passionate about answering this question, which is, what was the catalyst? So I'm going to assume that you didn't know you wanted to be in tech at like 18 years old or whatever, and there was a catalyst moment. And really interested in that. And why I'm interested in that is because, certainly the work we're doing in Academy, one of the big challenges is the inspiration stage, which is like reaching people and saying, hey, you may not be thinking about, or you may think you'll be no good at, but how about considering tech? And so super curious about that sort of initial catalyst.
I have a story for this. So.
Yeah, go on.
So if we rewind back to 2019, I was working in a recruitment company at the time in cybersecurity. So I was really enjoying it, and I really did like recruitment a lot. And it was something that I saw myself doing, but there was no passion in it. And I felt myself just running the mill and just placing people, not actually trying to do a good job, but somehow I was. I was speaking to my manager at the time, and we were having a proper performance conversation because they were looking to promote me. And he asked me, for the next 10 years, do you see yourself doing this exact same role that you're doing right now? And the answer was just no. I just couldn't do it. And I loved what I was doing, but I was too close to it to understand that actually my passion was somewhere else. And a few months prior to that meeting, I had actually started my boot camp anyway, so I was already making moves to try and get into tech regardless, but I thought more long term, like next year, next however, instead of actually, next few months, like let's try and make it work. So I think the catalyst for me was really having that frank conversation and actually really drilling into what I wanted from my career, which was to work in tech, actually as a technical person.
Great story, big pivot moment. Okay.
Go on, Mark, I'll be biased on that.
Okay, Rob.
One burning question, if I may. You've had a nightmare at work. You decided you're going to jack it in. Where do you go? What platform? What place do you look for your next job?
Everyone's going to go
In an order of priority, if you can. Just 1, 2, 3.
Troy, I feel like you have an idea.
I go straight to LinkedIn. I mean, my inbox, as you can imagine, is like stuffed full of opportunities. So normally, just look through there. LinkedIn Jobs is pretty good for me as well. And I have used some of the job sites, but I feel like they're a bit outdated now.
Yeah, LinkedIn. It's one of those things you kind of feel bad for recruiters because you ignore them until you want them, and then you go back and start replying to some things. And you do. I would find that I do actually read a lot of the messages, and if something does catch my eye, then I'll accept the friend request or the LinkedIn request. Or
I'm sure you will.
Send a quick reply and find out a bit more, but it might not be the right time for me at that moment. And then the other job site that I mainly use would be Otter, which is mainly startups, I think, but I think it's quite a spectrum. But I find the UX great for that, so I like it.
Amazing. We've got a question at the back as well.
Yeah, maybe for those more from the code bootcamp background. I think the biggest hesitant from businesses is the assessment piece, getting that right or wrong. Do you have any good or bad examples of assessments and how companies have made you feel safe in an interview, fairly assessed, and also an equitable situation?
Whoever wants to take it.
It's one of the non-standard people, isn't it? So,
live coding is like the flavour of the last 2 or 3 years. That's what we push. I feel pretty confident in that, but yeah, I'm starting to look at myself.
I think with interviewing in general, I think there's just the bias piece, isn't it? And I think making sure that you understand who it is you're interviewing and what they actually have to offer. And it's a two-way thing. I think with your question, I don't have a specific example that I've seen, but I've done a mock tech interview and it went really badly. It was when I was in my bootcamp. And it felt like I could never be good at it. But over time and just continuing to try, you do get better. So I think the main thing is to give good feedback.
Very fine. Oh yeah, go on.
I could add. So I think as well, what's really important is to keep the interview as much as what they'll be doing on a daily basis as possible. Obviously, there's lots of companies who give these questions that make no sense to a developer's daily life, and I think keeping the interview as close to what they do as possible and keeping the environment really relaxed is massively beneficial.
So just to follow up to that, do you freak out if you just get sent a HackerRank link?
Yeah, I mean, unless it's Google or a massive company, I wouldn't expect to do anything like that.
I'd like to say if I got sent a HackerRank link, I would want to work for the company less because I would think they're being lazy about their interviewing process.
Very final
Agreed.
question.
It's just a short question. So first of all, when you're looking for a job on LinkedIn, would you be more able to speak to someone who works for the company if they were in-house? And in terms of feedback on your first few weeks at the business, would you prefer an anonymous questionnaire or talking to your buddy?
I think for the feedback, it's just speaking to somebody that I feel is a confidence of my buddy. Anonymous questionnaire feels really impersonal, and it would be nice to actually talk through concerns because a lot of the time there's miscommunication that happens and it's just a case of addressing it that fixes it. Sorry, what was the first part of your question?
On LinkedIn, if you were looking for a job and
Yeah.
you were talking to a recruiter, would you rather talk to someone at an agency or an internal recruiter? Or does that make no difference to you?
For me personally, no difference, but I think I have a different lens on that problem. I think that generally it would be better to speak to somebody in the team that you're going to join.
Okay, I might pause this there because I know it's time for roundtable. There's clearly lots to react to here, but I'm sure these folks will all look forward to receiving your LinkedIn messages very shortly. Thank you so much. Give them a round of applause. Thank you, guys.